You say you have low self-esteem. You look in the mirror and see failure, regret, shame. You speak to yourself in quiet cruelty. But let us call it what it truly is. Not low self-esteem, but broken energy. A fractured current of the soul. Not a defect of your work, but a wound in the invisible architecture of your being. This is not a moral failure. It is the result of fragmentation. Pieces of you, abandoned, silenced, rejected, lie scattered in the dark corridors of your unconscious. You do not lack worth, you lack reunion. Your suffering stems not from being inadequate, but from being estranged from the parts of yourself that were exiled when you fell, when you failed, when you learned it was unsafe to be whole. The reconstruction of self-love does not begin with affirmations or applause. It begins in the underworld. It begins when you turn inward, not to fix yourself, but to listen, to witness the forgotten child within you, the shadow you tried to suppress, the anger you weren't allowed to feel, the grief you feared would drown you. When these voices are heard, energy begins to move again. You have mistaken survival patterns for identity. You thought the mask was your face, but masks are heavy, and when you put them down, the true self rises, not perfect, but real, not invulnerable, but rooted. Love for the self is not a performance, it is a deep reckoning. It is the fire that comes after the storm, the kind of love that holds space for contradiction, for sorrow, for becoming. There is gold in your darkness, there is power in the places you avoid, there is sacredness in your sorrow, and there is life waiting beneath your despair. This is not about becoming better, this is about becoming whole. And when wholeness returns, self-love is not something you have to create, it is something you remember. Do not chase the illusion of perfection, chase truth. Return to yourself, not the self the world rewarded, but the self you abandoned to be loved. Your energy is not broken forever, it is simply waiting for your return. Healing begins with integration, not improvement. We are taught to improve ourselves, to polish our image, to optimize our habits, to strive for success that looks good on the outside. We treat healing like self-enhancement, like a to-do list. Meditate more, think positively, eat clean, be better. But healing doesn't begin with improvement, it begins with integration. True healing isn't about fixing what is broken, it's about reclaiming what was lost. Not about becoming someone new, but about remembering who you were before the world taught you to forget. Improvement chases the ideal. It is always aimed at the horizon, always trying to become worthy, flawless, complete. But integration looks inward. It recognizes that you already hold everything you need. It's just been scattered across the landscape of your experiences, buried under shame, fear, and the need to be accepted. To integrate means to gather those pieces, even the ones you don't like, especially the ones that hurt. There are parts of you that you pushed into the dark because they were inconvenient, embarrassing, too emotional, too intense, too needy. You believed you had to hide them in order to be loved, to survive, to belong. And maybe that was true at one time. But now those parts wait in the shadow, not to haunt you, but to rejoin you. Not as enemies, but as exiled friends who remember a deeper truth about who you are. Integration asks you to stop running from your pain, and instead ask it what it has to teach you. It asks you to sit with the fear, the anger, the guilt, not as signs of failure, but as guides to the places where your soul still trembles. It asks you to stop striving to become someone better, and begin accepting the wholeness of who you already are. Fractured though you may feel, this is the difference between a surface wound and a soul wound. A surface wound can be cleaned, patched and forgotten, but a soul wound, one that touches your identity, your belonging, your ability to feel safe in your own skin, cannot be treated with productivity hacks or spiritual bypassing. It must be seen, it must be held, it must be brought into the light of your awareness, and wrapped in compassion. To integrate is to say to every part of yourself, you belong. Even you, especially the jealous part, the broken-hearted part, the furious child inside of you, the bitter one, the part that still doesn't trust. These are not errors in the code. They are stories that need telling, feelings that need validation, energies that need expression. You do not have to agree with them, but you must acknowledge them. You must allow them to exist in the same house as your light, not locked in the basement. The irony that when you stop trying so hard to improve, and instead allow all of you to be here, something remarkable happens. You soften, you become more honest, more real. You stop performing and actually begin to experience it. You become grounded not in perfection, but in truth. And in that truth peace grows, not because you have eradicated your flaws, but because you have made room for your full humanity. Healing is not about becoming good enough. It is about realizing you were never unworthy to begin with. You were only disconnected from yourself, from your story, from the wounded voices that wanted to be heard. When you listen deeply, when you welcome the forgotten, when you walk toward the pain, instead of away from it, that is where healing begins. Self-love emerges when the shadow is welcomed. ChatGPT said, self-love is often misunderstood as a soft, glowing warmth, gentle affirmations, acts of kindness, mirror gazing with a smile. But the path to true self-love is not paved only with light. It winds through darker terrain, through the valleys of your inner world, where parts of you were cast away, buried, denied. You cannot love yourself fully until you welcome the shadow, the hidden, the shamed, the feared and the forgotten parts of your being. The shadow is not evil. It is simply the parts of you that were not allowed to exist. It is the anger you weren't allowed to express, the needs you were told were too much, the dreams that were mocked, the vulnerability you learned to hide. These pieces didn't disappear. They went underground. They became the hidden architecture of your inner world, silently influencing your choices, your reactions, your relationships. When you reject the shadow, you reject parts of yourself. You split. You create a war within, a battle between the image you show the world and the truth that lives inside. Self-love requires more than soothing words. It requires courageous seeing. It asks you to go where it's uncomfortable, where the truth isn't polished or pretty. To look at the resentment you carry, the envy, the desire for control, the wounds that still bleed even after all the healing work. These are not failures. They are signals. They are doorways. They are fragments of the self asking to be seen, not as problems to fix, but as parts to hold. You don't heal the shadow by judging it. You heal it by becoming curious. You ask, what does this part need? When did I first feel this way? What would happen if I allowed myself to feel this without shame? In that honesty, something powerful shifts. The parts you feared begin to soften. The energy you spent suppressing them becomes available again. You don't become perfect. You become whole. To welcome the shadow is to embrace your humanity in its full expression. It is to say, I am not only light, I am also night, and there is beauty in my darkness, not because it is present, but because it is real. In this embrace, self-love takes root, not the performance of love, but the embodiment of it. You stop trying to deserve your own care. You realize you never had to earn it. When the shadow is welcomed, your inner world becomes more peaceful. The parts of you that were fighting for attention, through self-sabotage, anxiety, emotional reactivity, finally feel heard. You no longer need to numb them or silence them. They no longer have to shout. This doesn't mean your pain disappears, but it becomes integrated. It becomes part of a larger story, a story in which you are not the villain, but the seeker, the survivor, the one returning to wholeness. True self-love is not sanitized. It does not exist in spite of your flaws, but because you've dared to see yourself clearly. You realize that even the ugliest moments had their reason, their roots. And while you are responsible for your choices, you are also worthy of compassion for the forces that shaped you. You become softer, not weaker, but wiser. Your love becomes a sanctuary, not a reward. Welcoming the shadow is not a one-time event. It is a lifelong process, a relationship with yourself that deepens as you grow. But each time you choose to face what you once feared in yourself, you take back power, you reclaim energy, and you open the door a little wider for love, not from the world, but from within. This is the love that sustains, the love that doesn't flinch, the love that can look into the mirror and say, I see all of you, and still, I choose to stay. Your inner wounds speak in symbol, not logic. There is a language within you older than words, more primal than reason. It does not speak in logic, arguments, or neatly ordered thoughts. It speaks in symbol, in image, in sensation, in the subtle weight of dreams. When you are wounded, truly wounded, not just on the surface, but in the unseen architecture of your being, that pain does not emerge in clear rational form. It emerges through metaphor, through patterns, through emotional echoes that ripple across your life again and again. Your inner wounds speak in symbol, not logic, and until you learn to listen in that language, healing will remain distant, unreachable. We are conditioned to approach pain with reason, to ask why it happened, to explain it, to reframe it with clever thoughts. But the soul does not respond to analysis, it responds to attention. The deeper parts of you, the ones carrying ancient grief or long-buried shame, cannot be dissected like a math problem. They reveal themselves through dreams, through the recurring pull toward people who mirror your original wound, through the quiet despair you feel in places that should bring joy. They appear as symbols, archetypes rising in moments of fear or longing, and they are asking not to be solved, but to be understood. You may find yourself sabotaging relationships, or staying small when something in you wants to expand. You may avoid silence, because it brings an ache too loud to ignore. These are not random behaviors. They are expressions of something sacred, trying to get your attention. They are symbols of an unspoken story, still living inside your body, your nervous system, your inner world. The wound does not say, I am unhealed. It says, notice me, by whispering through patterns you can't break or emotions that feel too big to name. When you try to meet this symbolic pain with logic alone, you reduce it. You explain it away. You turn the fire of your experience into a checklist. But when you allow the image to emerge, when you feel the wound as a living presence, you begin to relate to it differently. You begin to see that your sadness may be the face of a forgotten part of you, asking to return. That your rage might not be dysfunction, but the voice of your boundaries that were never honored. That your fear is not weakness, but a messenger from a place that never felt safe. Healing begins when you stop dismissing these messages as irrational. They are not irrational, they are non-rational. They operate outside the framework of control, beyond the tidy boxes of thought. When you honor that, you stop pushing the wound away, and instead invite it to speak its truth. Not in sentences, but in signs. You become a translator of your own soul. This requires stillness, curiosity, a willingness to feel what is uncomfortable, and to witness what arises, without trying to immediately label or fix it. It requires trust in the intelligence of your inner world, the part of you that dreams in symbols, that remembers what your conscious mind has long forgotten. There is wisdom in every ache. There is a story in every pattern, and beneath every symbol is a piece of you waiting to be returned to the whole. You are not broken. You are speaking in an ancient language, and when you learn to listen in that language, what once seemed like chaos becomes clarity. What once felt like madness becomes meaning. Do not be afraid of what you don't immediately understand. The soul reveals itself in fragments, and with time, with attention, those fragments form a mosaic, a picture of your becoming, a map back to yourself. The persona protects, but it also constrains. There is a mask you wear, often without knowing. It was shaped by years of expectations, rewards, punishments, and quiet fears. This mask, this persona, was not created to deceive. It was built to protect. It helped you survive in a world that demanded certain behaviors, certain appearances, certain roles. It allowed you to navigate relationships, avoid rejection, gain approval, and function in systems that did not always care for your essence. The persona is not the enemy, it is a guardian. But what once protected you can also become a prison. The persona is the image of who you think you need to be. It is the curated self, polished, measured, acceptable. It is the smile you wear when you're breaking inside, the competence you show when you're lost, the calmness that conceals your storm. You created it with care, often unconsciously, to meet the world where it was, and in many ways, it served you. It helped you belong. It softened your edges to fit into the spaces where sharpness wasn't welcome. It taught you to read a room, to perform, to adapt. But over time, if you begin to identify too closely with the persona, you lose access to the deeper truth of who you are. The persona becomes a costume that no longer fits, but one you can't take off. You smile too often. You say you're fine too easily. You become afraid of being seen without the mask, not because you're dishonest, but because you've forgotten what your real face looks like. This is where the persona begins to constrain. It keeps you safe, but it keeps you small. It maintains the illusion of control, but blocks authentic connection. You can't feel deeply when you're constantly performing. You can't grow when every gesture is calculated to maintain an image. You begin to feel the cost of your own containment. The true self, the part of you that is raw, contradictory, spontaneous, vulnerable, starts knocking from underneath, at first quietly, then louder, through anxiety, through fatigue, through a numbness that spreads through even the brightest moments. To grow, you must learn to honor the persona without becoming enslaved by it. You must recognize the purpose it served, how it protected your tender heart, your wild energy, your deep needs, and then begin the slow work of removing it where it no longer serves. This isn't an act of destruction, but of integration. The persona is not discarded, it is rebalanced. You begin to let your true self breathe again. This requires risk, vulnerability. Saying, I don't know when you're expected to lead. Saying, I'm hurting when you've always been the strong one. Letting someone see the parts of you that are messy, confused, unfinished. It feels dangerous because it is. You are risking rejection, but in that risk lies your freedom. Because the love you receive while wearing the mask will never feel real. It cannot touch you where you most need to be seen. The persona is a tool, not your identity. Use it when necessary, but do not confuse it for the self. Your true self is fluid, paradoxical, mysterious. It is not always composed. It does not always conform, but it is alive. And that aliveness is what the persona cannot offer. The more you return to it, to your instinct, your emotion, your unpolished truth, the more whole you become. Healing is not about destroying your defenses. It is about understanding them, thanking them, and then gently, courageously, choosing to live beyond them. The persona protects, but it also constrains. And real freedom begins the moment you realize you are more than the mask you learned to wear. The true self is found through descent, not ascent. We are taught to seek the light, to strive upward, to improve, to transcend pain. We chase goals, climb ladders, reach for higher states of being, as if the truth of who we are exists somewhere above us, shining and pure. But the true self is not found through descent. It is discovered through descent into the depths of the inner world, into the places we avoid, the wounds we silence, the truths we fear. The path to wholeness is not a staircase, but a spiral, leading us downward before we rise. Descent is not defeat, it is initiation. It begins when the old strategies stop working, when your strength collapses, your image shatters, or your plans unravel. It is the moment when surface answers fail, and you are left face to face with what you've long buried. The descent is uncomfortable, humbling, even terrifying, but it is sacred. It strips away illusion and compels you to meet yourself in raw, unfiltered form. In the descent, the ego loses its grip. The parts of you that once held control, achievement, certainty, perfection, begin to dissolve. You fall out of who you thought you were, and that fall is necessary, because the self you constructed to survive is not the same as the self that seeks to be whole. You must come undone before you can be fully known, not by the world, but by yourself. This journey takes you into grief, into anger, into shame and sorrow, not to wallow in darkness, but to retrieve the parts of you exiled there. These are not negative emotions. They are voices that were never allowed to speak. They carry memories, meanings, truths that were inconvenient or overwhelming, but they are part of your inner landscape, and until they are seen, you will remain split, performing light while haunted by shadow. To descend is to stop pretending, to stop performing healing and begin living it. It is to let the wound speak instead of silencing it with positivity. It is to enter the cave, not with a map, but with a willingness to be changed. You cannot skip this part. Any attempt to rise without going down first will only reinforce the mask. Ascent without descent becomes escape, spiritual bypass, denial, dissociation. The light that comes from this place is thin, fragile, easily shattered by the next hardship, but the light that emerges after descent is different. It is not borrowed, it is born from within. It carries the weight of truth and the softness of compassion. It does not need to prove because it knows where it came from. You do not become the true self by polishing your image. You become it by surrendering to the process of remembering, piece by piece, who you were before fear. This journey cannot be rushed. Descent has its own rhythm. It may come through heartbreak, through illness, through depression or disillusionment, not as punishment, but as a call to depth. And when you answer that call, when you stop resisting the fall, you begin to find what no amount of striving could give you: rootedness, authenticity, peace that doesn't depend on circumstance. The true self is not above you. It is beneath the layers you've outgrown. It waits in the silence, in the stillness, in the truths that have long gone unspoken, and it rises, not through, but through surrender. You descend not to lose yourself, but to reclaim what was lost, and from that place, humble, honest, whole, you finally rise, not to ascend above life, but to rejoin it, fully alive, and fully yourself. Energy returns when the soul feels safe. There are seasons in life when exhaustion becomes more than physical, when even after sleep and rest, the heaviness lingers. You wake tired. You move through your days with a quiet weight pressing on your chest. It is not laziness. It is not weakness. It is the soul telling you it does not feel safe. When the soul is under siege, when it feels unseen, unloved or unprotected, your energy retreats inward, like a frightened animal hiding in the dark. The vitality you once had disappears, not because it's gone, but because it is guarding itself. Energy returns when the soul feels safe. Safety is not the absence of difficulty. It is not a perfect environment or a flawless routine. Safety is inner permission. It is the felt knowing that you are allowed to exist, to speak, to feel, to want, to rest without threat. For many, this sense of safety was never fully established. The world became a place to perform, to prove, to suppress. The inner voice, instead of being an ally, became a critic. And over time, the soul learned it had no sanctuary, nowhere to go, where its full truths would be welcomed. So it shut down, not because it was broken, but because it was wise. The soul is not impressed by achievement. It is not interested in appearances. It responds to honesty, to care, to presence. It opens in the warmth of your own compassion, not in the harshness of your expectations. When you constantly push yourself, berate yourself, or override your inner signals, your soul tightens its grip on the energy you long for. It won't give you the fire you seek, while you remain at war with your own essence. You cannot bully yourself into vitality. Instead, healing begins when you stop punishing yourself for being tired, for needing space, for carrying wounds. It begins when you speak to yourself, not as a problem to be solved, but as a being to be honored. It begins when you allow the heart to be fragile, the body to be slow, the mind to be unsure, and when you treat none of these as failures. In this climate of gentleness, the soul peeks out. It begins to return. Often the return of energy is subtle. You feel a flicker of interest in something again. You notice a moment of clarity, a spontaneous laugh, a tiny shift in the weight you've been carrying. These are signs the soul is feeling safe enough to re-emerge. And when it does, it brings with it not just energy, but direction. The fog begins to lift. The will to engage with life begins to stir, not because but because you made space for it. This is not about perfection. You will still have days of fatigue, of fear, of withdrawal. But if you consistently show up for yourself with tenderness, if you become a place of safety rather than pressure, your soul will trust you again. And as that trust rebuilds, energy flows more freely, creativity returns, passion awakens, the heaviness lifts, not all at once, but steadily, like the slow return of spring after a long winter. You do not have to do more to be whole. You do not have to earn the right to feel alive. You only have to make room for the parts of you that were told to stay hidden. Energy is not something you chase. It is something you receive. When the deepest parts of you no longer feel threatened, let your soul rest. Let it speak. Let it be. And watch gently, quietly, as the life you thought was lost begins to bloom again from within.